He dug a trap for us. That was the first thing Barbara Whitcomb screamed when the sheriff stepped out of his cruiser. She was standing ankle-deep in the black mud of my west pasture. One hand was waving in the air. The other was clutching a phone covered in wet fingerprints. Behind her, her white Lexus sat buried almost to the axle. The rear wheels had spun so hard they had carved 2 deep trenches into the ground. 30 feet behind it, a silver Range Rover leaned sideways like it had given up. Behind that was a black Tahoe, a Mercedes SUV, and a contractor's pickup with its front bumper pressed into the mud. 5 vehicles, all stuck, all sitting in the middle of my private pasture, and every single one of them had driven past a sign that said, "Private pasture, no HOA access, livestock area." At least, that sign had been there before Barbara pulled it out of the ground. Sheriff Alvarez stopped beside his cruiser and looked across the field. He looked at the stuck convoy, then at Barbara, then at me. I was standing on the dry side of the fence with a manila folder under my arm. My boots were muddy, but not because I had chased anyone. I had been repairing the north fence when the screaming started. Barbara pointed straight at me. "That man sabotaged a community access road," she said. "He knew we were coming through here." I didn't answer right away. My father taught me something a long time ago. When someone is digging their own hole, don't reach for the shovel. Sheriff Alvarez turned toward me. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "you want to tell me what happened?" Barbara cut in before I could speak. "He created a hazard. He trapped us. This is HOA access. This land has been used by the community for months." I looked past her at the 5 vehicles. Their tires were sunk deep into the same wet clay basin my father had warned people about for 40 years. Then I looked back at the sheriff. "That isn't a road," I said. "That's my pasture." Barbara laughed. Sharp, ugly, confident. "Your pasture?" she said. "You mean the muddy field you refuse to maintain?" I opened the folder, but I didn't hand everything over yet, because this was not going to be settled by volume. It was going to be settled by the right proof at the right time. What Barbara did not know was simple. I had the deed. I had her signed warning receipt, and I had a trail camera on the oak tree she never bothered to look at. If you've ever had someone treat your property line like a suggestion, tell me what you would have done. Because Barbara didn't just ignore my sign. She pulled it out of the ground. Sheriff Alvarez looked at Barbara first. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said, "do you have a recorded easement for this land?" For the first time since I had known her, Barbara Whitcomb stopped talking. Behind her, one of the men from the Range Rover stepped out and sank to his shin in the mud. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. Barbara said this was the shortcut. The sheriff heard it. So did I. Barbara's face tightened. "This is an emergency community route," she said. "No," I said. "It's a grazing pasture." She spun toward me. "You people always act like empty land is sacred." That one landed harder than she probably meant it to, because the pasture behind her was not empty to me. My father had worked that land until his hands could barely close. My wife, Ellen, had planted the line of young oaks along the fence 23 years earlier. My son had learned to drive a stick shift on the farm lane that ran along the edge of it. Every post, every rut, every gate chain had a memory attached to it. But Barbara didn't see land. She saw access. She saw convenience. She saw 12 minutes she could shave off the drive to her HOA clubhouse. And now she saw 5 expensive vehicles sinking into something she had been warned not to enter. Sheriff Alvarez finally took the folder. Barbara reached for it. "You don't need to read his little papers," she said. "He's been hostile since the beginning." Sheriff Alvarez pulled the folder away from her hand. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm going to read what he brought." That was when Barbara's confidence cracked. Not completely. Not yet. People like Barbara do not collapse all at once. They lose pieces of themselves one document at a time. And the first piece fell when Sheriff Alvarez opened the folder and saw the photo of Barbara herself, both hands on my warning sign, yanking it out of the ground. The sign wasn't just missing. It had been removed on camera, and that camera was mounted on the oak tree my wife planted. 3 months earlier, Silver Ridge Estates didn't know my name. They just knew me as the farmer next door. That was fine with me. My name is Eli Mercer. I was 58 years old at the time, and I had lived on Mercer Farm nearly my entire life. My father bought the first 40 acres in 1978, with a bank loan, 2 tired tractors, and more nerve than good sense. By the time he died, he had pieced together 84 acres of pasture, hayfield, drainage ground, and a small cattle lane along the western fence. The west pasture was never pretty, in the way city people mean pretty. It had low spots, clay pockets, wild grass, a shallow drainage swale cut across the middle like a scar. In spring, the field turned green and soft. In summer, it dried hard enough to fool people who didn't know better. But after heavy rain, It looked solid from the road, while the ground underneath turned into black mud, the kind that could swallow a truck to the frame if someone was foolish enough to drive across it. My father used to say, "Land tells the truth. People just don't listen." He knew every inch of that pasture. So did I. After he passed, I kept the farm going. Not big, not fancy. 27 head of cattle. Hay twice a year. Repair work on the side when neighbors needed a gate welded or a pump fixed. I didn't have employees. I didn't have a logo on my truck. I didn't have a lawyer on speed dial. What I did have was a metal file cabinet in my mudroom. My father kept every deed, every survey, every tax bill, every permit, every handwritten note from the county drainage office. When I was younger, I thought it was overkill. Then Barbara Whitcomb moved in next door. Silver Ridge Estates was built on the old Haskins timber tract, right up against my western fence. The developer cleared the land, cut roads, built 48 houses, a clubhouse, a pool, and a small artificial lake they marketed as countryside luxury. The brochures made it look peaceful. They showed families drinking coffee on porches, while cows grazed in the background. My cows. They used my pasture as scenery before they ever asked my name. At first, I didn't mind. People take pictures of land. That isn't a crime. And I had lived long enough to know that not every insult deserves a response. But then the complaints started. A woman in a blue tennis visor told me my cattle smelled unwelcoming. A man walking a golden doodle asked when I planned to clean up the rustic fencing. Someone from the HOA left a printed notice on my gate saying my hay equipment was visible from their walking trail. I wrote, "Not an HOA," across it with a black marker and mailed it back. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, Barbara Whitcomb came to my farm in her white Lexus. She was the kind of woman who dressed like every room was expecting her. Perfect hair, cream jacket, oversized sunglasses, a clipboard tucked under one arm like it gave her authority over the weather. She parked in front of my gate and honked. I was replacing a hinge on a cattle panel. I didn't rush. When I walked over, she smiled without warmth. "Mr. Mercer," she said. "I'm Barbara Whitcomb, president of the Silver Ridge Homeowners Association." I nodded. I figured. Her smile twitched. "We need to talk about access." That word would become her favorite weapon. Access. Not trespassing, not convenience, not shortcut. Access. She pointed past me toward the west pasture. "There's an old path through your field that connects to Ridge Lake Drive," she said. "Several residents have mentioned it would be helpful for community circulation." "There's no path," I said. Her smile hardened. "There are tire marks. Because someone cut my fence last week." She made a soft, fake sympathetic sound. "Rural boundaries can be unclear." "No," I said. "They're surveyed." She looked at my boots, then my patched work shirt, then the rust on my truck. "Mr. Mercer, we're not trying to be difficult. Silver Ridge is bringing value to this area. Cooperation benefits everyone." That was the first time I heard what she really thought. To Barbara, I wasn't a neighbor. I was an obstacle wearing muddy boots. I told her the land was private agricultural property. I told her no vehicles were allowed. I told her the pasture had livestock, soft ground, and no easement. She tapped her clipboard. "We'll review the records." "Good," I said. "Start with the county." She didn't like that. People like Barbara prefer records when they think the records belong to them. Before she left, she turned back toward my pasture. "It seems like a waste," she said. "What does?" "All that empty land." I looked at the west pasture. At the oak line Ellen planted. At the gate my father welded. At the cattle moving slowly under the afternoon sun. Then I looked back at Barbara. "It isn't empty," I said. She laughed softly, like I had misunderstood something simple. And that was the moment I knew she was going to become a problem. Silver Ridge Estates had one problem the developer never advertised. The clubhouse was inconvenient. Not for me. I didn't use it. I would not have gone near that glass and stone building if they paid me. But for Silver Ridge residents, the clubhouse sat at the far end of Ridge Lake Drive. To reach it from the front entrance, you had to follow a curving road around the lake, pass 3 cul-de-sacs, then loop back up a hill. It was a pretty drive, but it took 12 minutes. Through my west pasture, it took 2. That was all Barbara needed to know. A week after our first conversation, I found fresh tracks across the grass. Not tractor tracks, not farm equipment, passenger tires, wide ones. Someone had driven from the HOA's unfinished walking trail, through a weak spot in my fence, across the low ground, and out near the old cattle lane. The tire marks curved around the drainage swale and passed close enough to the cattle trough that my herd had scattered. I fixed the fence. The next morning, the wire was down again. That time, I installed a trail camera on one of Ellen's oak trees. The camera caught a golf cart first, then two SUVs, then a man on a bicycle wearing a Silver Ridge polo shirt. They weren't lost. They weren't confused. They were using my pasture as a private shortcut. That camera didn't stop Barbara, but later, it would stop her entire story. I printed the photos and drove to the Silver Ridge office. Barbara's assistant, Claire, was behind the front desk. She was young, nervous, and careful with every word. When I showed her the pictures, her eyes moved from the photos to Barbara's closed office door. She looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Mercer," she said quietly, "I can see if Mrs. Whitcomb is available." Barbara came out before Claire could knock. She looked at the photos and sighed like I had brought her a child's drawing. "Mr. Mercer, nobody is hurting your land. That fence was cut twice. We don't know who did that. Your golf cart has the HOA logo on it." She glanced at the photo. "That could be maintenance. Maintenance doesn't have permission either." Barbara lowered her voice. "There's been discussion about historical use. There's been trespassing." "Mr. Mercer," she said, "you need to understand something. Silver Ridge residents were told this area connected naturally to the Lake District. By who? The developer. The developer didn't own my pasture." She smiled. "Developers understand access better than farmers." That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was clever. It wasn't. It stayed with me because she said it with complete confidence. She truly believed a man with a sales brochure had more authority over my land than the deed in my file cabinet. I went home and pulled the records. My father's deed, the 1981 survey, the 1996 drainage letter, the county plat map showing the fence line exactly where it still stood. No easement, no shared access, no right-of-way, nothing. People can drive somewhere a few times and call it a habit. That does not make it an easement. An easement has to be recorded. Barbara did not have one. So I called the county recorder and paid for certified copies. I also ordered a new boundary survey. Not because I was unsure, because Barbara was. 2 days later, an HOA notice appeared on my gate. It said, "Courtesy notice of community access obstruction." I read it twice, just to appreciate the nerve. According to the letter, my fence was interfering with a long-standing community passage and creating safety concerns for residents seeking efficient access to shared amenities. The letter cited HOA bylaws. I was not in the HOA. The letter threatened escalating fines. They had no authority to fine me. The letter was signed by Barbara Whitcomb. I put it in the folder. That same afternoon, I installed a larger sign at the west fence. Private pasture. No HOA access. No vehicles. Livestock area. I used 2 steel posts and concrete footings. Not because I was trying to be dramatic, because wind hits hard across that field. Barbara arrived before the concrete had dried. She stepped out of her Lexus with 2 board members behind her. One was a retired banker named Glenn. The other was a woman named Patricia, who kept whispering into her phone. Barbara looked at the sign like it had personally insulted her. "This is aggressive," she said. "It's clear. It sends the wrong message to the community. The message is, don't drive through my pasture." Glenn cleared his throat. "There are liability concerns if emergency vehicles can't pass. There are no emergency vehicles using my pasture, but there could be. Then they can ask the county." Barbara folded her arms. "You're making this very difficult." "No," I said. "You're making my private land sound public." Her face changed then. Just a little. The smile disappeared. "Mr. Mercer, people around here are trying to build something better. You're clinging to an outdated idea of property." I looked at the pasture. My father called that outdated idea ownership. Patricia stopped whispering. Barbara stepped closer. "You may find that the county sees this differently once we raise the safety issue." I nodded. "Raise it." She didn't expect that. Bullies like fear. They don't know what to do with paperwork. By sunset, I had scanned every document I owned. By the next morning, I had a file labeled Silver Ridge Access Claim. That was the first file. Barbara would help me fill 3 more. The first time Barbara called law enforcement on me, I was replacing a fence latch. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't blocking anyone. I wasn't waving a weapon around, like she later implied at a board meeting. I was standing beside my own gate with a wrench in my hand. A deputy cruiser rolled up around 9:40 in the morning. Deputy Cole stepped out, looked at me, looked at the fence, then looked towards Silver Ridge, where Barbara stood with her phone raised like she was recording a hostage rescue. "Morning, Mr. Mercer," he said. "Morning." He lowered his voice. "We got a call about a road obstruction." I pointed at the pasture. "Does that look like a road to you?" Deputy Cole didn't answer right away. He had grown up 2 towns over. He knew farms. He knew the difference between a road and a cow path. Barbara marched over before he could say anything. Deputy, this man is obstructing a community access route and threatening residents. I looked at her. Threatening. You told Mrs. Delaney she'd be trespassing if she crossed here. She would be. Barbara turned to the deputy with a look that said, "See?" Deputy Cole asked. "Is there an easement?" Barbara blinked. "This route has been used." "That's not what I asked." Her voice sharpened. "The HOA is reviewing documentation." I walked to my truck, took out a copy of the survey, and handed it to Deputy Cole. He unfolded it on the hood of his cruiser. Barbara tried to lean over it, but he angled his body away. I liked him for that. The survey showed the west boundary clearly. It also showed the drainage swale and the agricultural designation. No easement, no shared road, no community access. Deputy Cole tapped the map. "Mrs. Whitcomb, this is private property." Barbara laughed. "Well, obviously it's private in the technical sense, but there are broader community considerations." Deputy Cole looked up. Technical private property is still private property. She didn't like that either. People like Barbara treat plain language as disrespect when it does not serve them. The deputy told her not to cross the fence without permission. He told me to keep documenting. Then he drove away. I thought maybe that would slow her down. It didn't. The next week, I received a letter from a law office in town. Not a lawsuit, just a threat in expensive formatting. It accused me of creating an unsafe obstruction, interfering with emergency access, and exposing residents to risk by refusing to open what it called a necessary connector route. It demanded that I restore access within 10 days, or face possible action for injunctive relief and liability for any delay to emergency response. Restore access to land they had never owned. I put that letter in the folder too. By then, each piece of paper had a purpose. The deed closed the ownership lie. The survey closed the boundary lie. The deputy's report closed the road lie. The attorney letter proved Barbara was escalating a claim she could not document. Then came the rumors. At the feed store, a man I barely knew asked why I was fighting the whole neighborhood. At church, Mrs. Paxton told me she had heard I blocked emergency vehicles. At the county co-op, someone said Barbara had described me as unstable. That one bothered me. Not because I cared what Barbara thought of me, but because unstable is how people prepare the ground before they take something from you. First, they make you unreasonable. Then they make themselves necessary. I had seen it happen to older farmers before. A developer wants a strip of land. A board wants a drainage easement. A neighbor wants access. Suddenly, the owner is difficult, unsafe, bitter, confused, behind the times. That is why I started writing everything down. Date, time, weather, incident, witness, photo number, camera file. My father kept records out of habit. I kept them because Barbara was teaching me the cost of not doing it. Then the rain showed me Barbara's problem was bigger than access. 3 days of steady June rain came in. Not storm rain. Worse. Slow, patient rain that soaked deep into the clay and filled every low spot in the west pasture. The drainage swale carried water like it was supposed to, but the ground on either side turned slick and soft. I walked the fence line that Thursday morning and found something that made my stomach tighten. The HOA had built a landscaped berm along their trail. Mulch, decorative stones, little shrubs, pretty, and maybe illegal, because that berm blocked the natural runoff path and pushed water straight toward my pasture. The old drainage records in my cabinet suddenly mattered more than ever. I took pictures. Then I called the county drainage office. A woman named Linda Shaw answered. I explained who I was, where the property sat, and what had changed after Silver Ridge developed the adjoining land. She asked if I had historical drainage documentation. I almost laughed. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "I have a file cabinet full of it." She scheduled an inspection for the following week. That evening, I installed another sign near the low ground. Danger. Soft ground after rain. Private agricultural land. No vehicle access. I photographed it. I logged it. I mailed a certified warning letter to the HOA. Barbara signed for it the next morning. I know because the receipt went into the folder. 2 days later, she stood at the Silver Ridge clubhouse and told residents I was weaponizing mud. That phrase would come back to haunt her, because when her convoy sank in my pasture, the mud wasn't what trapped her. Her own signature did. The certified letter was only 1 page. I kept it simple, because simple things are harder to twist. It said the West Pasture was private agricultural property. It said no easement existed. It said no HOA resident, guest, contractor, agent, or board member had permission to enter by vehicle or on foot. It warned that the ground became hazardous after rain because of natural clay soil and a documented drainage swale. It reminded them livestock were present. It said any entry would be documented and reported as trespassing. At the bottom, I included 3 attachments: the deed, the survey, the county drainage record. I mailed it certified to the HOA office and to Barbara personally. She signed for both. That mattered. Not emotionally. Legally. A person can pretend they didn't know a lot of things. They can say the sign wasn't clear. They can say the fence looked open. They can say someone told them it was allowed. But when their own signature is on the receipt for a warning letter, ignorance gets harder to perform. Barbara performed it anyway. 2 days after she signed, I received an email from the HOA office. The subject line said, "Hostile agricultural obstruction." I stared at that for a full minute. Hostile agricultural obstruction. That was Barbara's gift. She could take a man protecting his fence and make it sound like an act of war. The email claimed my signs created fear-based messaging. It said my refusal to provide access was anti-community. It called my references to mud and livestock exaggerated intimidation tactics. It also said Silver Ridge would continue evaluating appropriate remedies. I printed it. Into the folder it went. Then I called Linda Shaw at the county drainage office. She came out the following Tuesday in a county truck with mud on the tires and no patience for decorative nonsense. She was in her 60s, short, sharp-eyed, and carried a rolled map under one arm. I liked her immediately. She walked the west pasture with me. I showed her where water used to run. I showed her the new berm on the HOA side. I showed her the soft ground where tire marks had already cut deep. Linda stood at the fence and looked toward Silver Ridge. "They changed the grade," she said. "I thought so. They probably didn't think a pasture counted." That sentence was the whole problem. To Barbara, my pasture was empty. To the developer, it was scenery. To the HOA, it was a shortcut. To the county drainage map, it was part of a functioning water system that had existed longer than Silver Ridge, longer than Barbara's presidency, and longer than every luxury house on that hill. Linda took photos. She marked coordinates. She told me the county would open a drainage review. "Can I maintain the swale?" I asked. "You can restore it to documented agricultural drainage," she said. "Don't expand it. Don't deepen beyond the old profile. Keep records." I almost smiled. Records I can do. The permit came through 9 days later. And this part matters. I did not dig a trap. I restored an old drainage swale that was already in the county records. I hired a local excavator to bring it back to its permitted shape, because water from Silver Ridge was being pushed onto my land. We followed the county profile. We photographed the work. Linda inspected it afterward. The swale was shallow enough to walk across when dry, and clear enough to carry runoff when wet. But after heavy rain, the land around it was still a clay basin. The danger was not hidden. It was posted, photographed, mailed, signed for, and ignored. By then, Silver Ridge was preparing for its Lakeview Founders Brunch, a ridiculous name for what was basically a real estate event. They invited current residents, prospective buyers, local business owners, and a reporter from a county lifestyle magazine. Barbara wanted everything perfect. Then Ridge Lake Drive was partially slowed for utility work. Not fully closed, just slowed. The official detour added 15 minutes. Barbara decided that was unacceptable. The warning that mattered most did not come from the county. It came from inside Barbara's own office. Claire called me the day before the brunch. Her voice was low. "Mr. Mercer, I probably shouldn't be calling." I set down my coffee. "What happened?" "They're talking about using your pasture tomorrow." "Who is?" "Barbara. Some board members. A contractor." She said the emergency access argument protects them. I looked out the kitchen window toward the west field. "Did anyone mention my letter?" A pause. "Yes. And?" "She said your letter proves you knew the route existed." That was the moment I realized Barbara wasn't confused. She was committed. There is a difference. Confused people can be corrected. Committed people have to be exposed. I thanked Claire and hung up. Then I checked every trail camera battery. I photographed every sign. I walked the fence line. I made sure the gate was locked. Then I sent one final email to the HOA. No permission is granted for access across Mercer Farm. Entry onto the west pasture is trespassing. Ground conditions are unsafe for vehicles after rain. I copied the county drainage office. I copied Deputy Cole. Then I went to bed. It rained again after midnight. Not much, just enough. The morning of the brunch was too pretty for what was coming. The sky cleared around 7. Sunlight hit the pasture and turned the wet grass silver. From the road, the field looked peaceful, firm, almost inviting. That was the danger. Clay country lies with a straight face. I fed the cattle early and kept them in the north section, away from the west pasture. Then I parked my truck by the equipment shed, poured coffee into a thermos, and went to work on the north gate, not at the fence, not hiding in the trees. I had already warned them in writing. I had copied the county. I had copied Deputy Cole. I had posted the signs. I had the cameras running. If I ran down there yelling, Barbara would get exactly what she wanted, an angry farmer video. So I stayed calm. At 9:18, the first notification hit my phone. Trail camera 3. Motion detected. I opened the image. Barbara's white Lexus was stopped beside my west fence. Behind it sat 4 more vehicles. The convoy looked staged, like she wanted to arrive at the clubhouse with a royal escort. Barbara stepped out wearing cream pants, a navy blazer, and shoes that were about to learn something about agriculture. A man in sunglasses got out of the contractor's truck behind her. I recognized him from the HOA documents. His name was Darren Whitcomb, Barbara's husband. His company had been mentioned in the special assessment proposal for alternate access improvements. I had seen the name once and circled it. At the time, I didn't know if it meant anything. That morning, it meant plenty. The trail camera took another photo. Barbara stood in front of my sign. Then another. She grabbed the signpost with both hands. Then video. She pulled once. The post didn't move. She looked around, annoyed. One of the residents stepped out of the Range Rover. "Barbara, are you sure we're allowed through here?" Barbara didn't even hesitate. "This is under emergency access review," she said. "The county knows about it." That was a lie. Then Darren walked over and helped. Together, they rocked the sign back and forth until the wet soil loosened. They pulled it out. Barbara dragged it toward the fence and dropped it face down in the grass. Then she waved the vehicles forward. The Lexus rolled into my pasture at 9:24. The Range Rover followed. Then the Tahoe. Then the Mercedes. Then Darren's contractor truck. 5 vehicles. All past the fence line. All on camera. All entering after the sign had been removed. They made it about 40 yards. The first part of the pasture was high enough to hold them. That probably made Barbara feel vindicated. I imagine she smiled. I imagine she told the person in the passenger seat, "See? He exaggerates everything." Then the Lexus reached the low ground. The front tires crossed the swale. The rear tires did not. Mud climbed over the tread, slick and heavy. The wheels spun. The back of the Lexus shifted sideways. The Range Rover tried to go around. That was worse. It left the faint cattle lane and hit the softer basin. Its front right tire sank fast. The driver accelerated, which is exactly what you should not do in pasture mud. The vehicle lurched, dropped, and stopped. The Tahoe driver panicked and braked. The Mercedes tried to reverse. Darren's truck pulled forward to help. Within 8 minutes, the entire convoy was stuck. I know it was 8 minutes because the camera timestamps were clear. At 9:32, Barbara called me. I didn't answer. At 9:34, she called again. I let it ring. At 9:37, my voicemail captured her voice. "Mr. Mercer, your field has damaged multiple vehicles. You need to come out here immediately and fix this. Fix this. Not apologize. Not ask permission. Not admit trespassing. Fix this." At 9:41, I heard shouting across the pasture. At 9:46, I saw one of the men from the Range Rover step into the mud and lose a loafer. At 9:52, Barbara called 911. Her story, as I later heard from the dispatch record, was that a hostile landowner had sabotaged an HOA access route and trapped residents in dangerous mud. Dangerous mud. The same mud described in the warning letter she signed. The same mud named on the sign she removed. The same mud sitting inside the property line shown on the survey she refused to read. I put on my jacket, picked up the folder, and walked to the west fence. By the time I got there, Barbara was yelling at Darren. Darren was yelling at the Mercedes driver. The Mercedes driver was yelling about his shoes. Nobody was yelling about easements. Not yet. Then Sheriff Alvarez arrived, and Barbara finally got the audience she had been asking for. Sheriff Alvarez didn't come in loud. That was one thing I respected about him. He didn't perform authority. He carried it. His cruiser stopped on the gravel shoulder outside my fence. Deputy Cole pulled in behind him. I saw Cole look at the pasture, then at me, then at Barbara's Lexus buried in mud. His expression said exactly what mine did. She actually did it. Barbara started toward the sheriff as fast as the mud allowed. "Sheriff, thank God. This man has been harassing our community for weeks." Alvarez looked at her shoes, then at the vehicles, then at the open gap in my fence. "Is anyone injured?" "No, but that's not the point. He created a hazard." "Is anyone injured?" he repeated. Barbara's jaw tightened. "No." "Good." Darren sloshed up beside her, red-faced and sweating. "My truck is a commercial vehicle," he said. "This delay is costing money." Sheriff Alvarez ignored that and turned to me. Mr. Mercer. I nodded. Sheriff, you called this in? No, sir. Mrs. Whitcomb did. Do you know why these vehicles are in your pasture? I know why I think they're there. Barbara snapped. Because this is a community access route. Alvarez looked at her. Do you have documentation of that? We have historic use. That wasn't my question. The sheriff asked again. Do you have a recorded easement? Barbara looked toward Darren. Darren looked at the mud. No, I said. She doesn't. Barbara spun toward me. You don't get to answer for the HOA. No, I said. The county records do. I handed Sheriff Alvarez the folder. Barbara made the same mistake she always made. She assumed paper only mattered when she held it. What is that? She demanded. Records, I said. The sheriff opened the folder on the hood of his cruiser. First came the warranty deed. That established ownership. Then the county survey. That established the boundary. Then the county plat map. That showed no road. Then the certified warning letter. That showed she had been told. Then the delivery confirmation. That showed she signed for it. The sheriff paused there. Mrs. Whitcomb, he said. This appears to show you received written notice not to enter this pasture. Barbara's voice went smooth. That letter was part of an ongoing dispute. It says no vehicle access. It was not a lawful restriction on community movement. Deputy Cole looked up. Ma'am, it's private land. Barbara pointed at him. You already took his side once. Cole didn't answer. Good officers know silence can be cleaner than argument. Then Sheriff Alvarez reached the photos. The first showed my sign standing upright at 8:02 that morning. The second showed Barbara beside it at 9:19. The third showed her hands on the post. The fourth showed the sign on the ground. The fifth showed her Lexus entering the pasture. The sixth showed the convoy following. The sheriff looked at the photos longer than he needed to. That was for Barbara. When he finally spoke, his tone was different. Mrs. Whitcomb, did you remove Mr. Mercer's posted sign? Barbara crossed her arms. That sign was placed to intimidate residents. That's not what I asked. It was obstructing access. Did you remove it? She looked toward the residents behind her. That was the first time she realized they were listening differently. Before, they had listened like followers waiting for instructions. Now they listened like people wondering how much of their trouble was her fault. Darren stepped in. The sign was misleading. Sheriff Alvarez turned to him. Did you help remove it? Darren opened his mouth, closed it, then looked at Barbara. The sheriff wrote something in his notebook. Barbara's voice rose. Are you seriously treating us like criminals because we drove through mud? No, Alvarez said. I'm treating this like a trespass complaint on posted private agricultural land. The word trespass changed the air. One of the women from the Mercedes said, Barbara, you said this was allowed. Barbara didn't turn around. Sheriff Alvarez continued reading. Then he reached the drainage permit. Barbara jumped on it immediately. There, she said. That proves he dug it. No, I said. It proves the county-approved restoration of an existing swale. The sheriff called Linda Shaw at the county office. He put the call on speaker. I didn't ask him to. He did it because Barbara kept insisting the swale had been created to trap them. Linda's voice came through clear and irritated. Yes, Sheriff. That swale restoration was permitted. Yes, I inspected it. No, it is not a road. No, Silver Ridge has no drainage approval to direct vehicle traffic through that pasture. Barbara's face went pale under the makeup. Then Linda added the part none of us expected her to say out loud. And Sheriff, since you're out there, please photograph the HOA berm on the west side. We have an open review on unauthorized runoff diversion. Darren muttered something I couldn't hear, but Barbara heard it. She turned toward him. Don't say anything. Sheriff Alvarez heard that too. He closed the folder. Mrs. Whitcomb, he said, I suggest you stop making statements until we sort out exactly who authorized this. And for the second time that morning, Barbara Whitcomb went quiet. Getting the cars out took 6 hours. Not because there weren't tow trucks, because nobody wanted to touch 5 luxury vehicles buried in agricultural mud, while the sheriff, the county drainage office, and an angry landowner stood there with cameras running. Finally, a recovery company from 2 towns over arrived with a winch truck and a driver named Boone. Boone had the cheerful brutality of a man who had seen every stupid thing a vehicle could do. He climbed out, looked at the pasture, looked at the vehicles, and whistled. Somebody drove all that through here after rain? Barbara glared at him. Boone looked at me. Your land? I nodded. Posted? I nodded again. He looked back at Barbara. Well, he said, that was ambitious. I liked Boone immediately. The recovery was slow. Boards under tires, winch lines, mud splatter, people slipping. Barbara stood near the fence, trying to make phone calls that got shorter and quieter each time. The Lexus came out first, making a suction sound that caused one of the residents to turn away. Then the Range Rover. Then the Tahoe. The Mercedes had to be pulled backward at an angle. Darren's contractor truck was last because it had gone the deepest trying to rescue the others. By the time it came free, the West Pasture looked like a battlefield. Ruts, torn grass, broken fence wire, mud dragged onto the shoulder. One of Ellen's small oak branches was snapped where someone had grabbed it while trying not to fall. That branch bothered me more than the tire ruts. Grass grows back. Some things don't. Sheriff Alvarez wrote a trespass report. Deputy Cole took statements. Linda Shaw arrived in person around noon and began photographing the drainage berm on the HOA side. She was not smiling. Barbara tried one last time to regain control. This entire situation could have been avoided if Mr. Mercer had cooperated with reasonable community needs. Linda looked at her. Mrs. Whitcomb, reasonable community needs don't override a recorded deed. Barbara's face hardened. You people keep hiding behind technicalities. Linda pointed toward the mud. That technicality is the reason your vehicles are being removed from someone else's farm. One of the residents, a man named Carl who had been driving the Tahoe, turned toward Barbara. You told us the county recognized this as access. I said it was under review, Barbara snapped. No, Carl said. You said we had the right. That was the second crack. The first crack was the sheriff reading my folder. The second was her own people realizing she had put them in the mud. But the mud had only exposed the trespass. One wet piece of paper was about to expose the reason for it. While Boone was finishing the recovery report, he asked Darren for his company information. Darren had already told the sheriff his truck was commercial, and Boone needed the business name for the recovery paperwork. Darren opened a clipboard from the passenger seat. Mud had smeared across the pages. He tried to flip past one sheet quickly, but Deputy Cole saw the heading. Hold on, Cole said. What's Silver Ridge West Connector? Darren froze. Barbara moved fast. That is HOA business. Sheriff Alvarez walked over. What kind of HOA business? Darren said nothing. Cole took the page Darren had half covered with his hand. It was an invoice draft. At the top was Darren's company name. Under description, it said, Preliminary Access Improvement Consultation, Silver Ridge West Connector. Amount, $18,500. Carl, still muddy from trying to save his Tahoe, stared at it. Wait, he said. Is that the thing from the special assessment? Another resident said, The Emergency Access Project? A woman near the Mercedes whispered. Barbara said it was county required. Barbara turned on them. This is not the time. But it was exactly the time. That is the thing about public collapse. It rarely happens when the guilty person schedules it. It happens when the wrong paper lands in the wrong hands in front of the right witnesses. Sheriff Alvarez asked if the HOA had authorized vehicle access through my land that morning. Barbara said the board had discussed it. Carl said there had been no vote. Patricia, the board member who had been quiet since stepping out of the Range Rover, finally spoke. We never approved crossing Mr. Mercer's property. Barbara stared at her. Patricia looked terrified, but she kept going. You said you had verbal clearance. From who? The sheriff asked. Nobody answered. Because there was no one. There was only Barbara, her husband's access contract, and my pasture standing inconveniently between them and a payday. By late afternoon, the vehicles were gone. The mud remained. So did the ruts. Barbara tried to leave without speaking to me. I stopped her with one sentence. You forgot something. She turned. I picked up the muddy sign she had ripped out and held it upright. Her eyes moved from the sign to the sheriff. I said, This is going back where it belongs. You are not. For once, she had no comeback. The sheriff's scene proved Barbara trespassed. The HOA meeting proved why. The emergency meeting was held 6 nights later at the Silver Ridge Clubhouse. I almost didn't go. Not because I was afraid. Because I had no interest in sitting through 2 hours of people pretending my land was a community issue. But Linda Shaw called me that afternoon. You should attend, she said. Why? Because they're going to blame you. I looked at the folder on my kitchen table. By then, it had grown thick enough that the rubber band barely held. I figured. And because I'll be there, that got my attention. When I arrived, the clubhouse parking lot was full. Word had spread faster than rainwater through a bad culvert. Residents stood in clusters, whispering. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked angry. A few looked at me like I was the one who had driven their cars into mud. Barbara stood at the front of the room in a red blazer, recovered enough to perform again. Darren stood near the side exit. That told me something. People who know they did nothing wrong don't stand near exits. Barbara opened the meeting with a speech about rural hostility, infrastructure challenges, and one neighboring property owner's refusal to support community safety. She never said trespassing. She never said sign. She never said her signature was on the warning receipt. She displayed a slide titled, "The Need for a Safe West Access Route." A murmur moved through the room. Then she said, "Unfortunately, Mr. Mercer's actions resulted in damage, distress, and potential liability for several residents." I stood in the back and let her talk. That matters. If you interrupt a liar too early, they get to adjust. Barbara continued for 12 minutes. She claimed the access route had existed informally. She claimed my warnings were exaggerated. She claimed the mud incident proved the pasture needed improvement. She claimed Darren's company had only been consulted because of his unique local expertise. Then Linda Shaw raised her hand. Barbara pretended not to see her. Linda stood anyway. "I'm Linda Shaw, County Drainage Office." The room shifted. Barbara's smile froze. Linda walked to the front with a folder of her own. "I want to clarify several statements made tonight," she said. "First, Mercer Farms West Pasture is not a community access route. Second, no recorded easement exists. Third, the county did not authorize Silver Ridge residents, guests, board members, or contractors to cross that land." Barbara said, "This is not a county hearing." Linda looked at her. "You referenced the county 8 times in your presentation." A few residents murmured. Linda continued. "Fourth, Mr. Mercer's drainage swale restoration was permitted and inspected. Fifth, Silver Ridge's landscaping berm appears to have altered runoff patterns without proper review." The murmurs grew louder. Barbara tried to interrupt. Linda raised one finger. "I'm not finished." I nearly smiled. Then Linda said, "Sixth, our office received documentation showing the HOA was warned in writing not to enter that pasture before the vehicle incident occurred." All eyes turned to Barbara. That was my cue. I walked to the front and placed my folder on the table. Barbara whispered, "Don't you dare." I looked at the residents. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to show what happened." I connected my laptop to the projector. I did not start with every document. I started with the smallest clue. The first slide showed the tire tracks cutting across my pasture 2 months earlier. The second showed the cut fence. The third showed the HOA golf cart crossing my land. Then I showed the deed. Then the survey. Then the county map showing no road, no right-of-way, and no recorded easement. I heard someone whisper, "Then why were we told it was access?" Barbara's face tightened. Then I showed the HOA notice that cited bylaws against me, even though I was not in the HOA. Then the attorney letter that threatened emergency access action. Then the drainage record. Then the county permit. Then the certified warning letter. Then the receipt with Barbara's signature. Carl stood up. "You signed for the warning before you let us through?" Barbara said. "The letter was legally questionable." Carl's wife said, "That's not an answer." Then I showed the final email denying access. Then the sign standing at 8:02. Then Barbara and Darren removing it at 9:19. A gasp moved through the room. Then the convoy entering at 9:24. Barbara looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. But I wasn't done, because the trespass was only half of it. I showed the invoice draft. Silver Ridge West Connector. Darren Whitcomb Consulting. The room changed completely. There is a sound people make when confusion turns into anger. It isn't loud at first. It's low. A pressure building. An elderly resident named Martha stood near the front. She had been one of Barbara's supporters. I had seen her at the fence once, shaking her head at my signs. Her voice trembled. "Barbara, did you use our assessment money to create a road across land we didn't own?" Barbara said, "Martha, you don't understand development logistics." Martha's face hardened. "I understand my checkbook." That broke the room open. Questions came from every side. Who approved Darren's invoice? Why were residents told the county supported access? Why was the warning letter not disclosed? Why did Barbara remove the sign? Why was the HOA exposed to liability? Why was a special assessment tied to land the HOA did not own? Barbara tried to regain control. "This is exactly the hostility I warned you about," she said, pointing at me. But nobody followed her finger. They were looking at the screen, at the photo of her hands on my sign. There are moments when a person's authority dies before they stop speaking. That was Barbara's moment. Patricia, the board member, stood. "I moved to suspend President Whitcomb pending investigation." Glenn looked like he wanted to disappear. Carl seconded the motion. Barbara shouted, "You can't do this." Martha said, "Watch us." The vote wasn't close. People ask me if I enjoyed watching Barbara fall. The honest answer is complicated. I enjoyed the truth coming out. I enjoyed the sheriff reading the survey. I enjoyed Linda Shaw saying no easement in front of the room. I enjoyed watching residents understand that my pasture had never been theirs to grant, sell, cross, or improve. But I did not enjoy the damage. I did not enjoy the ruts in the west field. I did not enjoy the broken fence. I did not enjoy the snapped oak branch. or the way my cattle refused that corner for 2 weeks after the shouting and tow trucks. Revenge makes a good title. Repair is what takes work. The consequences came in waves. First came the legal and property consequences. Sheriff Alvarez gave Barbara a choice through the county attorney. Accept a formal trespass warning, pay restitution, and stay off Mercer Farm, or fight it with the trail camera footage playing on a screen. She chose the warning. People like Barbara often love legal threats until evidence gets invited. The HOA paid for the fence repair, reseeding, and soil restoration. Boone's Recovery Company sent them a bill large enough that I heard about it from 3 different people at the feed store. Then came the financial consequences. Barbara resigned before the final report came out. Darren's company lost the Access Consulting contract. The HOA had to refund the special assessment tied to the West Connector project. The board issued a written apology to me, though I could tell a lawyer helped write every word. Then came the part that mattered most to the land. The county required Silver Ridge to remove part of the berm and install proper drainage controls. Linda Shaw personally inspected the work. She stood beside me afterward, hands on her hips, watching water flow where it was supposed to. "That should help your pasture," she said. "It will." She looked toward the HOA houses. "They'll complain about the cost. They should complain to the person who caused it." Linda smiled. "Some of them already are." A month after the meeting, Martha came to my farm with a pie. I was repairing a gate latch when she walked up carrying it in both hands like a peace offering. "I owe you an apology," she said. I wiped my hands on a rag. "You weren't the one who drove through my pasture." "No," she said. But I believed her when she said you were just being hateful. I didn't answer right away. The old me might have said something sharp. The tired part of me wanted to. But Martha was in her 70s. She had lost money to Barbara's assessment scheme like everyone else. And standing there at my gate, she looked less like an enemy and more like someone embarrassed to have been used. So I said, she was good at making people believe it. Martha looked at the pasture. "It's beautiful land." I followed her eyes. The grass was coming back in uneven patches. The swale cut clean across the low ground. The oaks along the fence had new leaves, even the one with the broken branch. "It is," I said. "I didn't see it before," she admitted. That meant more than the apology. Over the next few months, Silver Ridge changed. Not perfectly. Places like that do not turn humble overnight. But they changed enough. The new board posted financial records online. They created a rule that no HOA officer could hire a family company without a full resident vote. They removed the false Future West access map from their welcome packets. They sent every resident a copy of the county boundary clarification. And at my fence, they installed a sign facing their side. Not my sign, theirs. Private farm border. No HOA access. Respect livestock and property rights. I stood there the day they put it in. Deputy Cole happened to drive by and slowed his cruiser. "Looks official," he said through the window. "Looks late," I said. He laughed. Then he looked at the pasture. "Think anyone will try it again?" I looked at the soft green grass, the restored swale, the fence line, the cameras, and the sign Barbara once thought she could remove. "No," I said. "I think they finally learned where the road ends." That evening, I walked the west pasture alone. The sun was low, turning the mud tracks gold, where grass had not fully covered them yet. For a while, you could still see the scars from Barbara's convoy. 5 paths in, 5 paths out, all of them fading. I stopped by Ellen's oak tree and checked the camera strap. The bark had grown around the old scar where I mounted the first trail cam. I put my hand on the trunk. "Still standing," I said. The wind moved through the leaves. For the first time in months, the farm felt quiet again. Not empty. Never empty. Just mine. And if there is one thing Barbara Whitcomb taught me, it is this. A clipboard can scare people for a while. A title can fool a room for a while. A lie can travel pretty far when it wears the word community. But a deed waits. A survey waits. A camera waits. And sooner or later, the kind of person who ignores every sign drives straight into the truth. In Barbara's case, the truth just happened to be 6 inches of black pasture mud.